The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to look calmer than I felt. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the people nearby could hear it. Judge Harmon sat behind the tall bench, reading quietly. Then Mr. Blake, Cole's lawyer, stood and began to speak. Neglectful, unstable, emotionally harmful to her own child. Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the judge's face for any sign of reaction, but her expression stayed flat. Cole sat at the other table in a clean gray suit, his hands relaxed, his shoulders straight. He looked like a man who already knew how this would end. He never once turned to look at me. Mr. Blake placed a thick folder on the judge's desk and listed the accusations one by one. Missed school pickups, emotional breakdowns, and statements from people I once trusted. The room felt like it was shrinking around me, but I stayed still, because I knew something no one else in that courtroom knew yet. My name is Megan. Let me take you back through when I started noticing changes. It didn't start with a single explosion. It started quietly, the way a small crack runs through a wall before the whole thing gives way. The first real moment I noticed something was wrong was at our daughter Lily's 5th birthday party, about 18 months before we ended up in court. Cole and I had invited friends and neighbors over. Everything seemed normal until Cole pulled Frank aside and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Megan's been struggling lately. I'm really worried about her." I froze. I hadn't been struggling. I was tired. Lily had been sick for 2 weeks, but I was completely fine. I looked at Cole, expecting him to catch my eye and correct himself. He didn't. He just kept talking, his voice low and heavy with false concern, like he was sharing something painful. I smiled through the rest of the party, but something cold had settled deep in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. That was the first line of a story he had already started writing about me, long before I knew a story was being written at all. About 6 months after the birthday party, I started noticing small things. My phone moved from where I had left it. My daily planner was open to different pages than I remembered. One afternoon I came home to find Cole standing in the kitchen, typing quickly into his phone. He closed it the second I walked in. A week later I found a notebook in his desk drawer. I wasn't looking for anything. I was searching for a pen. But when I opened it I stopped breathing. Inside were dates and times written in his neat handwriting. October 3rd. Megan left Lily with sitter at 6 p.m. October 7th. Megan did not do school pickup. Arrived home 40 minutes late. October 12th. Megan raised her voice in the kitchen. I stood there reading page after page of entries going back months. He hadn't been writing a diary. He had been building a file. Every small mistake, every tired moment, every imperfect day, carefully recorded and dated, like evidence waiting for a trial that hadn't been scheduled yet. My hands were trembling by the time I closed it. Slowly and quietly, the people around me began to disappear. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. It happened the way fog rolls in, one thin layer at a time, until you look up and realize you can't see anything clearly anymore. Amber, my closest friend since college, started taking longer to reply to my messages. Then she stopped showing up to our Thursday lunches altogether. One evening she finally called, and her voice was tight and careful, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. "Megan," she said slowly, "Cole reached out to me. He said you've been having a really hard time, that you've been saying things that worry him." My stomach dropped. "What things?" I asked. She couldn't give me specifics. She just said he seemed genuinely concerned. I asked if she believed him. She went quiet for too long. That silence told me everything. Cole had been working the room long before I even realized there was a room to work. He was taking apart my support system, one friendship at a time, making sure I had no one left to stand beside me when the time came. It was a Tuesday night in January. Lily was already in bed. Cole and I were sitting in the living room with the television on, though neither of us was really watching it. The tension between us had been building for weeks, thick and heavy like the air before a bad storm. Then Cole set down his glass, looked at me and said something I never forgot. "If this ever goes to court," he said, his voice flat and calm, "you won't win." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He tilted his head slightly, as if he was surprised I needed an explanation. "I'm just saying," he continued quietly, "that things don't always look the way they are. especially to people on the outside. Then he picked up his glass and looked back at the screen. My hands went cold. I had always told myself his behavior was just intimidation. Empty words meant to keep me small and unsure. But sitting there in the lamplight, I understood something new. He wasn't warning me out of cruelty. He was informing me with confidence. The plan was already in motion. It had been for a while. I found the second phone on a Friday evening in February. Lily was at her grandmother's for the weekend, and I was tidying the bedroom when I moved Cole's gym bag from the top shelf of the closet. It was heavier than it should have been. I set it down and unzipped the front pocket. The phone was tucked behind his things, dark and silent. My hands were shaking when I turned it on. It wasn't locked. The messages loaded quickly. Most were between Cole and a contact saved as WP. A family law attorney I later confirmed was across town. The messages went back 11 months. In one, Cole had written, "She still doesn't know. I need the documentation stronger before I move." In another, "Once the custody case is filed, she'll have nothing to stand on." And then one that stopped me completely. "The key is making her look unstable long before anyone asks." I photographed every single message with my personal phone. Then I put the second phone back exactly where I had found it and zipped the bag closed. I didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in months I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The next morning something shifted inside me. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and made a clear and quiet decision. I was done reacting. Done defending myself in small moments. Done trying to explain away his comments or prove my worth during our daily arguments. From that morning on, I would treat Cole the way a scientist treats a subject, carefully and without emotion. I would watch what he said and did. I would write everything down. I would stay calm when he pushed me, even when every part of me wanted to push back hard. I understood now that every time I raised my voice, every time I cried in front of him, every time I stormed out of a room, he had been sitting there with his notebook ready. So I stopped giving him what he needed. I smiled when he expected frustration. I spoke softly when he wanted a fight. I started keeping my own records. A small notebook I kept locked in the glove compartment of my car, far from the house. I dated every entry carefully. He had 11 months on me. But I was a fast learner and I had something he didn't. The truth. 2 weeks after finding the hidden phone, Cole tried a new approach. He started making casual comments about my parenting, always gently, always wrapped in the language of concern. "Lily mentioned you snapped at her yesterday," he said one evening, stirring his coffee without looking up. "She seemed pretty upset about it." I knew that wasn't true. Lily and I had spent that whole afternoon baking cookies and doing floor puzzles. It had been one of our best days in weeks. But I also knew exactly what Cole was doing. He wanted me frustrated. He wanted me to argue and raise my voice so he could add another entry to his notebook. So instead I pressed record on my phone, slipped it quietly under a dish towel on the counter, and turned to face him with a calm expression. "That's strange," I said evenly. "We had a really nice day." He pushed a little harder, suggesting I had been short-tempered lately. I nodded slowly and said I would pay closer attention. When he left the kitchen, I stopped the recording and saved the file with the date and time. That was the first of many recordings. And he had given me nothing usable at all. In March, I began looking more closely at our joint bank account. I had always managed the household finances, groceries, Lily's school fees, utilities. Cole deposited only what we had agreed on each month for shared expenses, keeping the rest in his personal account. But something had been feeling off for weeks. So I pulled the full statements going back 8 months and spread them across my kitchen table on a quiet afternoon when Cole was at work and Lily was at school. I found it almost immediately. Small transfers, never more than $400 at a time, moving to an account I did not recognize. When I added them all up, the total was just over $11,000 over 8 months. I called my bank from my car during my lunch break. The transfers were legal, made from a joint savings account we both had access to. But the timing said everything. They had started the same month his hidden phone messages began. He was not just building a custody case against me. He was quietly draining our shared money and preparing to leave me financially exposed, with a child to raise, legal bills to face, and almost nothing left to fight with. In court, Mr. Blake presented what he called his most compelling piece of evidence, He told Judge Harmon that on the night of March 15th, I had left Lily alone with a babysitter for nearly 6 hours without warning or adequate explanation. He used the word abandonment deliberately and let it hang in the air of the courtroom. I watched the judge write something on her notepad. My chest tightened. But I remembered that night with perfect clarity. I had gone to my book club, the same one I attended every third Friday of the month. Cole himself had arranged the babysitter, a teenager from our street, because he claimed to have a work dinner that same evening. I had texted him at 8 o'clock to check in. He had replied, "All good. Sitter's great." I came home at 9:30. Lily was bathed, fed, and watching cartoons on the couch. The sitter had smiled and said everything had gone smoothly. Cole had deliberately arranged that evening himself, selected the sitter, confirmed the timing, and then carefully twisted the entire sequence of events in his court filing to make it look like I had simply disappeared and left our daughter without care or thought. The next witness Mr. Blake called was Susan. She lived 3 houses down from us on Maple Court. I had always thought of her as a quiet, pleasant neighbor, someone who waved from her driveway and occasionally brought baked goods over during the holidays. We weren't close, but I had never had any reason to distrust her. She took the stand in a pale blue cardigan, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She told Judge Harmon that she had personally witnessed me shouting at Lily in our front yard on 2 separate occasions. She described my voice as frightening and said Lily had been crying both times. She spoke in a steady, measured tone, like someone who had rehearsed. I stared at her from across the room, a cold feeling spreading slowly through my stomach. I tried to place both incidents she described. One I could not locate in my memory at all. The other, I had raised my voice because Lily had suddenly sprinted toward the street with a car coming. Any mother alive would have done the same thing. Susan had taken a moment of pure protective fear and shaped it into something that looked like cruelty. And I was now completely certain that Cole had coached every word she said. That evening, after court adjourned for the day, I sat in Mr. Price's office with my notebook spread open across the conference table. I had been keeping records for 4 months by then, 112 separate dated entries. As we went through each accusation Mr. Blake had raised in court, we found the same thing every single time. Every claim traced directly back to a moment Cole had either engineered himself or deliberately twisted out of shape. The March 15th babysitter situation, Cole had arranged it. Susan's testimony about the front yard. The second incident she described happened during the exact week Cole had started another round of pointed comments about my parenting to mutual friends. The missed school pickup. Cole had changed the carpool arrangement that day without telling me. Mr. Price set down his pen and looked at me from across the table. "These aren't coincidences," he said quietly. I shook my head. They were not. Cole hadn't simply been collecting evidence of my shortcomings as a mother. He had been building each piece of evidence from scratch, constructing situations designed to make me look exactly the way he needed me to look. And I had been documenting the construction process without even fully realizing what I was recording. Mr. Blake's next claim was that I had refused couples therapy, which he said demonstrated my unwillingness to create a stable environment for Lily. He submitted a printed email chain in which Cole had suggested therapy 3 separate times and received no reply from me. I had no memory of those emails. When Mr. Price requested I check my account that morning, we found them buried inside a subfolder I had never created, already marked as read even though I had never opened them. Someone with access to my laptop had quietly moved them there. But that detail was not even the most powerful part of our response. I had something far better waiting. In my own records, I had 4 printed appointment confirmation emails from a family therapist named Dr. Benning. Each one confirmed a scheduled session for Cole and me together. And each one had been followed by a cancellation email, sent from Cole's own address, the day before each appointment. He had not been sincerely trying to attend therapy with me. He had been carefully creating a paper trail that would make it appear in a courtroom that I was the one refusing to go. Mr. Price submitted all 4 cancellation emails into evidence. The courtroom went very quiet. Then came the moment that nearly broke me completely. Mr. Blake stood and informed Judge Harmon that a child behavioral specialist had submitted a written report stating that Lily showed signs of anxiety at home and had expressed, during a private session, that she was sometimes scared of me. I felt the air leave my body. My hands went flat on the table in front of me. Lily. My daughter. The little girl I had read to every single night for 6 years. The one whose nightmares I had chased away with warm milk and made up stories about a brave little purple fox. She was scared of me? I wanted to cry. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone in that room that it was not true. But I didn't move. I sat in my chair and breathed slowly and carefully. Because 3 weeks before the hearing, something had happened that I had not yet told anyone about. I had been walking down the hallway outside Lily's bedroom when I heard voices coming through the half-open door. Cole's low, patient voice. And then Lily's smaller, uncertain one, repeating words that did not sound like hers at all. I had pressed record on my phone before I even fully realized I was doing it. Mr. Price nodded at me from across the table. I reached into my folder and pulled out a small USB drive. I handed it to the court officer, who carried it to the judge's bench. Mr. Price requested permission to play the audio recording for the court. Judge Harmon granted it. The speaker crackled once and then Cole's voice filled the room. Say it again, he was telling Lily calmly. Say, sometimes mommy scares me. A pause. Then Lily's small voice. But daddy, mommy doesn't scare me. Cole again, soft and patient. I know, sweetheart. But just say it for practice, okay? It's really important. A longer pause. Then Lily, quiet and uncertain. Sometimes, mommy scares me. And Cole. Good girl. Remember that. The recording ended. The courtroom was completely still. I watched Judge Harmon's face change for the first time since the hearing had begun. A slow, controlled tightening around her eyes and mouth. Mr. Blake shuffled papers without looking up from the table. Cole sat rigid in his chair, his jaw set and his shoulders locked. He had recorded our 6-year-old daughter being coached to lie about her own mother, and I had every word of it on tape. After the lunch recess, Mr. Price stood and asked permission to present a second set of materials. He walked to the projector screen and displayed a series of photographed messages from Cole's hidden phone, the ones I had captured back in February. They had been submitted through proper legal channels and verified as authentic. The messages told a completely different story from the one Cole had been telling in court. In one exchange with a contact saved as Ray, Cole had written, I don't actually want Lily full-time. That's not the point. The point is making sure Megan ends up with nothing. In another message to the same person, once she's painted as unstable, everything else follows naturally. And in a message to his attorney contact, if I get primary custody, the child support math flips entirely. She pays me instead. He was not fighting for his daughter out of love or genuine worry. He was using his daughter as the centerpiece of a financial strategy. The man sitting at that table in his clean gray suit, performing the role of a devoted and concerned father, had been coldly calculating this outcome for nearly a year before a single paper had been filed with the court. Mr. Price then submitted the bank records I had gathered. He walked Judge Harmon through each transfer. $11,200 moved from our joint savings over 8 months, in amounts small enough not to trigger any alerts. But the records revealed something beyond the transfers as well. Cole had taken out a life insurance policy on me 18 months earlier, one I had never been informed about or asked to sign. And his financial planner's notes, obtained through the legal discovery process, contained a projection model built around the assumption of full custody of Lily and monthly support payments flowing from me to him. The numbers had been run carefully. The outcome had been planned in advance. Mr. Blake objected twice during this portion of the presentation. Judge Harmon overruled him both times and leaned forward in her chair to examine the documents herself. I watched Cole from the corner of my eye. His left hand was pressed flat and hard against the surface of the table. His shoulders had stiffened completely. The composed and confident man who had walked into that courtroom that morning, certain he had already won, was beginning to show the cracks underneath. And we were nowhere near finished presenting our case. One of the boldest accusations in Cole's filing was that I had left Lily unsupervised in our backyard for over an hour on a Saturday afternoon in November while I slept inside the house. He had submitted a photograph, a time-stamped image of Lily sitting alone on the back porch steps, as evidence of neglect. His attorney presented it to the court with weight and gravity, but I had been waiting for this one specifically. I submitted 2 pieces of evidence in direct response. The first was a text message from Cole to Susan, sent that same Saturday morning. "Could you keep an eye on Lily for a bit? She'll be on the back porch." I told Megan I'd watch her, but I have a call to take. The second was my medical record from that same afternoon. I had a documented migraine and had taken a prescription medication my doctor had specifically noted causes significant drowsiness. Cole had told me he would watch Lily. He then left the house entirely, left our daughter alone on the porch, and returned later to photograph her sitting there by herself. He had manufactured the situation himself from beginning to end. Then he submitted a photograph of his own negligence as evidence against me. The final witness Mr. Price called was Frank. I had always known Frank as Cole's friend first. They had worked together years earlier and still played golf together most Sunday mornings. When Cole had been quietly turning people against me, Frank had stayed silent. I had assumed that meant he was firmly in Cole's corner. I was wrong about that. Frank took the stand with his shoulders square and his expression steady and clear. He explained that Cole had approached him 4 months before the hearing and asked him to provide a written statement saying he had personally witnessed me acting erratically at a neighborhood gathering. Frank said he had initially agreed, feeling pressured by how persistent Cole was in asking. But when he sat down to actually write the statement, he found he couldn't do it honestly. "It wasn't true," Frank told the court, simply and directly. "Megan was perfectly fine that evening. Cole told me specifically what to write. He said to describe her as out of control and difficult to talk to. I told him I wouldn't put my name on a lie." He then submitted a detailed written account of every conversation in which Cole had attempted to shape and direct his testimony. The room had gone completely still before Frank had even finished speaking. Judge Harmon set her pen down and looked directly at Cole. She asked him to clarify the timeline of the March 15th babysitter incident, specifically, which one of us had contacted the sitter and arranged her to come that evening. Cole stated clearly that I had arranged it. Judge Harmon asked him to confirm that answer. He did, without hesitation. She then held up a printed text message from our submitted evidence, a message from Cole to the sitter's mother, sent 4 days before March 15th, booking and confirming the arrangement himself. Cole looked at it. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something quickly. Cole cleared his throat and said he might have helped coordinate things. Judge Harmon asked why his sworn statement had placed the full responsibility on me alone. He said he had misspoken. She wrote something slowly and deliberately. Then she moved to the therapy cancellations and asked who had sent them. Cole said the appointments had never been properly confirmed. She held up all 4 confirmation emails. His jaw tightened visibly. "I may have canceled those," he admitted, his voice dropping low. It was the first crack spoken aloud in his own words. Judge Harmon did not move on quickly. She sat with that admission for a long and unhurried moment. Mr. Price stood one final time and asked Judge Harmon's permission to present a summary document. She nodded without hesitation. He placed a large printed timeline on the projector screen at the front of the room, a clean and detailed chronological record stretching back 17 months. It showed exactly when Cole had first made contact with his attorney, when the notebook entries began, when the financial transfers started, when he first made public comments about my stability in front of friends and neighbors, when the therapy appointments were canceled from his account, when he arranged the babysitter for March 15th, when the photograph of Lily on the porch was taken, when Susan was brought into his story, when Frank was pressured to write a false statement. Every single event laid out in clear order, with verified evidence attached to each one. The timeline showed without any room for argument that Cole had been constructing this case long before anything between us could reasonably have justified it. This was not the response of a worried father reacting to a difficult home situation. It was the carefully planned work of someone who had chosen an outcome first, and then built the evidence to match it. Mr. Price returned to his seat without a single dramatic word. The timeline needed none. Mr. Blake attempted a final round of questions with Cole on the stand. He asked Cole to speak about his love for Lily, to describe what had genuinely driven him to take legal action, to explain his fears as a father. Cole began steadily enough, his voice finding some of its earlier confidence. But then Mr. Price rose for cross-examination. He asked Cole to explain, given that he had personally canceled all 4 therapy appointments, Why his original court filing described me as the one refusing to attend. Cole said he hadn't looked at it that way. Mr. Price then asked him to walk through the evening of March 15th again, this time with the text messages visible on the projector screen beside him. Cole's answers became slower and more careful, circling back on themselves and losing their edges. He began saying "I believe," and if I recall correctly, in places where earlier that morning he had spoken with complete certainty. Then Mr. Price asked one final direct question. "Did you instruct your daughter to say she was afraid of her mother?" Cole looked at his lawyer. Mr. Blake said nothing. Cole looked back at the courtroom. "I was preparing her," he said quietly, "in case she was asked something." The room exhaled as one. Judge Harmon called the court to order the following morning. She had reviewed all submitted materials overnight. Her voice was level and precise as she read through her findings one by one. She stated that the evidence presented raised serious concerns about Cole's conduct throughout these proceedings, including the deliberate coaching of a minor witness, the systematic staging of incidents to create false impressions of neglect, and the concealment of evidence directly related to the therapy appointments. The accusations of instability and unfitness brought against me were not only unsupported by any credible evidence, but appeared to have been fabricated as part of a coordinated and calculated strategy. Primary custody of Lily was awarded to me. Cole was granted supervised visitation, pending a full review by a family services evaluator. Judge Harmon also recommended that the financial transfers be examined by a forensic accountant, and formally referred Cole's coaching of Lily to the family court's oversight committee for further action. I sat completely still as she read each finding aloud. Mr. Price placed his hand briefly beside mine on the table. I didn't cry. I had done my crying alone in my car, on quiet nights when no one was watching, and I wasn't sure how any of this would end. Not here. Not in front of him. Not today. Word traveled faster than I expected. Within a week, people who had been distant for months began reaching out, cautiously at first, then more openly. Amber called me on a Tuesday evening. She apologized in a quiet voice, saying she had believed Cole because he had seemed so sincere, so genuinely worried. She said she hadn't thought to question it. I didn't shout at her. I told her I understood, even though part of me was still working through that. Susan did not reach out. I heard through mutual neighbors that she had quietly stopped attending the neighborhood association meetings. Frank told me later that Cole had called him repeatedly in the days following the verdict. Frank had not answered once. Cole's professional life began unraveling as well. The forensic accountant's review led to a broader investigation into the transfers and the undisclosed insurance policy. The family court's referral regarding his coaching of Lily resulted in a formal finding that was entered into his permanent legal record. The man who had walked into that courtroom looking polished and utterly prepared, certain he had designed an outcome no one could dismantle, was now sitting inside a much smaller and quieter life than the one he had spent 17 months carefully planning for himself. 6 months after the verdict, Lily and I were sitting together on the back porch on a warm Saturday evening. She was drawing in her sketchbook, a purple fox, because that had been her favorite animal since I had made up those bedtime stories years ago. I was drinking tea and watching the fireflies begin to blink slowly in the grass below the steps. She looked up at me with her serious little face and asked, "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" I set down my cup and looked at her. "We already are," I told her. And I meant every word of it. I had started seeing a therapist on my own, not because anyone required it, but because I genuinely wanted to. Amber and I were slowly and carefully rebuilding our friendship. I was not the same woman who had sat frozen in that courtroom listening to her life be read aloud by someone who had never truly known her at all. I was steadier now, more honest with myself than I had ever been, more sure of what I was worth and what I would never again allow. Cole had spent nearly 2 years trying to prove to a court that I was unfit to be a mother. What he proved instead, in front of a judge and a room full of people, was that he was unfit to be trusted at all.